Good morning, colleagues. Very warm welcome to this half-term's webinar on Monitor Your School Attendance. My name is Caroline Kempner, and I head up the team who had been developing the daily data tool. It's a very snowy day today, and I don't know if that means we'll have more people on the webinar or less people, depending on what's going on in your school today. If we could go to the next slide, please, and I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping as usual. Thank you so much for joining. We will record the webinar and publish it on YouTube. Once the recording is available, we will email you the link. As ever, please do ask questions in the Q&A. If someone else has asked a question that is similar to yours, if you could uptick it, that would be great. That will help us manage the questions. We will answer as many as we can during the webinar, and if we can't answer them in the time available, we will send them out as FAQs along with the recording after the event. Again, as ever, we will share some useful links in the Q&A as we're going along, including the link to how to sign up to user research, because as you know, we're always interested in your feedback and all the developments that you see as a result of your feedback. So, what are we going to talk about today? I'm very delighted that in a moment I'm going to welcome Susan Ackland-Hood, our Permanent Secretary. And then our focus today will be on the newly published Attendance Toolkit for Schools. And we'll have an introduction from Rob Tarn, the National Attendance Ambassador. And then we'll be looking at a summary report that we have just released for secondary schools. We'll have a little look at the latest attendance statistics, and then I'll show you a new feature that we've also just launched. So with no further ado, I'll hand over now to Susan.
Thanks very much indeed, Caroline, and hello to everybody. It's really great to be joining you today. And I wanted to come on the call and to start by thanking everyone on the call for the work that has been going on up and down the country, which means that we've got about 300,000 more pupils in school every day in 2023-24 compared to last academic year. We know that this is really hard and detailed work that people are doing, and also that there's further to go. But everybody on the call knows how much difference it makes when children are in school, and also that we've got work to do because we saw such a significant shift in those figures over the pandemic. We've got a lot of work going on across the whole spectrum of attendance challenges, and a lot of that links to wider things that we're doing, not just across the department, but across the whole of government. So you may have heard conversations about the government's mission-based approach to government, trying to look at things in a much more cross-cutting way across the whole of government. This department leads on the opportunity mission, and Bridget Phillipson, our Secretary of State, heads that up across government. And the opportunity mission looks at how we can break that link between young people's backgrounds and their opportunities and chances in life. So over the long term, we're looking at intergenerational income inequality, but we know that that's driven by a set of things in the short term, which we've grouped into four main areas: making sure we're giving children the best start in life, making sure that every child at school can achieve and thrive. And the Secretary of State talked about achieving and thriving in a speech a couple of weeks ago that you've probably seen reported. And it's really important that it's achieving and thriving, that we're not having trade-offs there or thinking that one of those has to be sacrificed to the other. And then the third chunk is around the skills for opportunity and growth that you need as you start to emerge from the education system and go to work in the world. And underpinning all of those is a pillar that's around family security, which looks both at how we keep children safe and support them. And you may well have seen some announcements on children's social care that the Secretary of State made yesterday, but also around the underpinnings around child poverty and how we make sure that profound disadvantage isn't impacting on children's opportunities. And that's a joined up piece of work, that admissions work, across the whole of government. So we're working really closely with, for example, the Department for Work and Pensions on addressing the child poverty bits of it. And attendance is really central to all of those pillars, and to making sure particularly that every child achieving and thriving is a reality. And I just wanted to give a little bit of that framing, because what's happening in this group, to learn from each other, to try and make sure that we're using data brilliantly, but also that we're turning that into action that works and makes a difference, is so central to making sure that we really can break those historic links between children's backgrounds and their opportunities, which I think is the sort of thing that gets all of us up in the morning and makes us come to work to try and do better for children and young people. I suspect you've heard quite a lot about this, so I won't bang on too much about the attendance data system. I do think it's a remarkable thing, and again, I wanted to thank everyone on the call for their part in making it possible for us to use close to real-time data with that really deep granularity to help us understand this problem. We know that we do better in addressing and solving problems when we understand them properly, and the data also lets us look much more quickly at whether some of the things that we're doing locally, regionally and nationally are working, and help us see some of those kind of lead indicators quickly. I am really excited that we've got the attendance summary reports for secondary schools coming out today, which I think you're going to be taken through a little bit later. They're really helpful summaries, suitable for sharing with trusts and governors and others who want a kind of simple picture. I'm also really delighted that Rob Tarn is going to continue in his role as our National Attendance Ambassador, and he, in collaboration with the department and the attendance hubs and lots of colleagues, again, in schools who are doing this for real, has helped to put together an attendance toolkit, which again, he's going to, we've got a short video of him to show in a minute, just talking through the toolkit. And again, the data and the understanding is critically important, but then turning the data into action and doing something that targets the groups you're most worried about is obviously even more important, perhaps. And hopefully the toolkit will be a really useful, practical way of crystallising that. And we'll continue to be really interested in pulling more good practice in and keeping that as a kind of living document, because we know that there's still learning to do, and there will be brilliant practice in your schools and communities that we can continue to contribute and share. So I'm going to hand over to Rob Tarn, who's going to talk to us about the toolkit.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob Tarn. I'm Chief Executive Officer at Northern Education Trust. We have 30 schools across the north of England, a mixture of primary and secondary, and we primarily serve areas of high disadvantage. About around 50% of our children are eligible for pupil premium. I'm also the attendance ambassador for the Department for Education, and I was the architect with my team of the pilot of the attendance hub programme, and that really came about because I was a little frustrated that over the years, as a head teacher in many schools in challenging circumstances and as an executive head teacher, we were networking a lot in education around teaching and learning, around leadership, around even behaviour. Now, there was never really a coming together of schools to talk purely about attendance, and when people did refer you to schools to talk about attendance processes, there were always schools that were very different to yours, and they would, they'd send you to the kind of leafy grammar school down the road to say their attendance is 97%. Why didn't you go and see what they do? And the fact is, they didn't do very much at all. The kids just came to school every day, and so the attendance hub pilot the idea was let's find the schools that are similar to our school, North Shore Academy in Stockton, which is 66% pupil premium, had been judged outstanding for Ofsted and was running post-COVID with an attendance of over 94%. And we felt really obliged to share what we were doing with other schools that were similar. So the pilot attendance hub was schools that were similar to North Shore. Why don't we come together? Why don't we share what we do? And then the Department for Education invested in that and allowed us to run with that pilot and to scale up that pilot. So by the end, we had 31 attendance hubs, maintained schools, multi-academy trust schools and trust themselves, primary schools, secondary schools, special schools and APs, who were coming together with other similar schools to share resources. And the toolkit that we're launching today is really the capturing what it is that those attendance hubs were doing. And it's not meant in a you must do this way, everyone. Once you've done your data analysis, once you've found what your issues are in attendance in your school or schools, we hope that you'll find something in the toolkit that matches your context that you might want to try. And so unlike most case studies, it's not just the narrative of the case study. We've included all the resources that hub used, and they've shared with us free of charge. So we really hope that you engage with the process and that you find something useful in the toolkit. We're making progress on attendance. We're not back to pre-pandemic levels, but that's where we want to be. So we have made some progress, but there's a lot more to do. And the key themes you'll find in the toolkit are pretty much what we all know, and that what you know is that very effective leaders create cultures where children want to attend school, they feel safe and they feel aspirational and they do well. They have some really key systems. They're not overly complicated, but everyone does it every day. Everybody in the school has a view that attendance is their business. And they're pretty relentless in their focus on attendance, and they use data really, really cleverly, such that they put a floodlight across data, but they're very laser-like when they intervene. So we hope you'll find something in the toolkit that matches your context that you'll find useful. And thank you very much for attending the webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob.
Good morning. My name's Alex Turner. I work in the attendance team here in DfE, and I had the privilege of working with Rob and the hubs in other schools as the toolkit he just described came together. And I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes just to share with you a little bit more of the detail around what you'll find in the toolkit. What you can see on the screen are the sections I'll briefly cover, and a QR code which provides the link to the toolkit, which should also be in the chat. The first thing I wanted to emphasise is that the toolkit is intended for a wide audience of leaders, from school trust CEOs and improvement leads, head teachers, senior attendance champions, and attendance leaders and wider pastoral teams. So if you're attending as the only representative for your school today, I'd encourage you to share the link as widely as you deem sensible within your school to other leaders who you think might find it helpful. And if you think it is a helpful product, I'd also encourage you to share it with other schools or across networks you might be part of. As Rob said, the aim of the toolkit is to share what works for hub schools across different contexts and other system leaders tackling the absence challenge. The approaches, case studies and resources included in the toolkit have been sourced primarily from England's 31 attendance hubs and other system leaders. Again, as Rob talked about, there isn't a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to this. What the toolkit tries to do is bring together the experience of those schools I just described, and sets out how you can identify and remove barriers to attendance through strong practice in these 6 key areas, which we set out in the toolkit. The first is about using data and having a targeted approach, which takes you through how you might gather, share, and use attendance data to put in place the actions to improve attendance. The second section takes you through how you might embed a support-first culture and encourage really high attendance, making school a place where children feel they belong and want to attend. The third covers how you make attendance everyone's business in a school and ensure that individuals and teams work together to reduce absence. The fourth is about those systems and processes, how to develop and implement strong and rigorous processes to identify and respond really quickly to early trends in absence at cohort or individual level. The fifth is about relationships and building those really strong and positive relationships with pupils and families to understand and then prevent or remove barriers to attendance. And then the last section is how you can develop and share really strong and inclusive attendance communications that convey messages around attendance with real impact. Within each of those 6 areas in the toolkit, we we included elements around the actions that schools take and that we'd encourage you to consider to remove barriers and improve their practice. The resources such as tools, templates, videos or guidance from those schools and other credible sources, and then case studies which bring those examples to light and can show you how they've been adopted and implemented in a variety of different schools and contexts up and down the country. As well as taking that sort of floodlight on data and laser targeted intervention Rob talked about, having completed your analysis, we included a sort of self-assessment tool in the annex of the toolkit, which schools have told us is a really helpful way to select the elements of the toolkit you might engage with first. We'd encourage you to take a look at that audit and use that as a way to consider each of the elements in the toolkit and where you think those practices set out would improve your approach. Think really carefully about how you adopt and implement those practices using the resources in the toolkit. Much of the toolkit's content exemplifies how schools can meet the expectations set out in working together, which you'll all know became statutory in August of this year. As Rob put it, central to the attendance response and the toolkit is having a really clear and data-led approach to absence. And so accompanying this new toolkit is a new static report for secondary schools. And I'll hand over now to James, who will take us through that.
Hello, I'm James Lawrence. I lead a cross-cutting data science team at DfE, and I'm going to talk to you about the Monitor Your School Attendance Summary Report, which is a new report that became available on View Your Education Data a couple of weeks ago. So if we can move on to the next slide, thank you. So in the Monitor Your School Attendance area, under View School Attendance Data, there's a new item, Your Attendance Summary, which is where you can find this report. We've produced this initial release only for mainstream secondary schools. If you're not a mainstream secondary school, or in very rare edge cases such as having very few pupils aged 11 to 16, if you click on this, you'll just see no downloads available. If you don't have a report available and you think you should do, then do contact the help desk and we can identify why you don't have one. So if we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So the summary report will be distributed every half term, and I'll now run through what you can find in the report. All of the figures in this part of the presentation, they're just examples. They aren't the real national averages or the performance of any school. So the report starts with a comparison of your school's overall attendance and persistent absence rates with the national average for the time period covered by the report. Areas where you're at or above the average are coloured blue, and areas where you are below are coloured pink. Then there's a bar chart showing the overall attendance levels for pupils eligible and not eligible for free school meals, and pupils with and without SEND status. Okay, next slide, please. After that, there's a chart showing your school's overall attendance week by week and comparing that with the national average. You could use this chart, for instance, to see whether your attendance, maybe in the last week of the half term, went down more or less than the national average, and make individual week comparisons. Okay, next slide, please. Next, the report contains a comparison between your attendance this academic year compared with the same time period in the previous academic year, and that's split into the same 5 groups as the earlier chart comparing with the national average. Again, groups with attendance below last year are coloured pink, and groups with attendance at or above last year's are coloured blue. Next slide, please. Thank you. And lastly, the report contains an absence banding table, which will be familiar to you if you're already using the absence bandings report on View Your Education Data. It shows the proportion of pupils in each year group, in each 5% absence band, up to 50%, and the proportion of severely and persistently absent pupils in each year group. Some year groups may not be shown if your school doesn't have that year group, or there's a very small number of pupils in that year group. Next slide, please. Now, your attendance summary report is based on your daily attendance data, and you're free to use it and share it as you like, but there are 2 areas where it's likely to be particularly useful. The first is sharing with governors and other stakeholders such as your academy trust or local authority. We've heard both from governors and from leaders that having a ready-made report that can be shared as is a real time saver. And it's simpler for governors who govern more than one school to have a standard report that they can be familiar with the formatting. The reports do have safeguards in place that they won't reveal identifiable information. So if you want to share the reports more widely, for example, with parents, then you can. The second use case is helping you identify areas to explore in more detail. In this example, the school was above average in increasing overall attendance for all pupil groups except for pupils eligible for preschool meals, where they were below average and decreasing. So that's an area they may wish to investigate further. And the report contains instructions for how to access the relevant other resources in View Your Education data if you do decide to look deeper into some of the figures shown in the report. So we're now going to hear from Rob Tarn again with some examples of how schools have used all of these resources to identify a targetable group of pupils.
The first part of this toolkit is around the new data tool, and I think we're all unbelievably impressed by how the team at the department have created new tools that you can access to analyse trends in data across year groups and across percentile bands. We've had 90,000 users of this new toolkit this year alone, so it's certainly landing really well within the sector. We hope it does two things. We know that both of the following things are true. The first is that there are some very, very hard to reach families with children with very, very low, severely absent or critically absent attendance levels of below 50%, even below 20%. And sometimes it can feel like it's a barrier to whole school attendance because you've got a small group of children that you find it very difficult to reach. Actually, there are multiple solutions. One is that, of course, we can't give up on the most vulnerable children, the most vulnerable families, and we have to keep working tirelessly to break down the barriers that get those children back into school. But what we also know from the banding exercise is that the vast majority of children attend school 85% of the time or higher, and you can make a huge swing in all school attendance levels that have a correlation to outcomes for children and their life chances if you move just the huge number of kids who come to school nearly every time, nearly every day, and make them come to school nearly every day. So if they can attend school 8 times out of 10, we can get them to attend school 9 times out of 10. So we can move large groups of children without losing the focus on the most vulnerable, and we have to do both things at once. In my trust, we have a school in Northumberland called Blythe Academy, where we identified from the data tool that there are around 60 children in the year 7 who hadn't selected from a particular number of postcodes, who hadn't selected that school as their first choice, and they basically represented 25% of all the absence in year 7. And so we were able to use the data tool to identify those children. And then we worked in collaboration with the local authority through tutor time and through educational welfare officer visits to really target that group of children who were disproportionately persistently absent. And we even started working with the local authority, who Northumberland have been fantastic in working with us to identify children in future year 7s who perhaps will attend the academy without it being a first choice. And we've seen big changes in attendance patterns at Blythe as a result of the targeted intervention. So it's a school that finished COVID, and we got 50% 5+ this year with a positive progress 8 for the first time in its history. But it serves a very disadvantaged community in the northeast of England. It is just, it's very high white working class British, which for attendance and outcomes is one of the lowest groups in the country. Post-COVID, it was running at 78% attendance on some days, and for some year groups even lower than that. I think last week we were on 92%, and I think a bit more than that for year 11, I think 92.7. So I think there's evidence that with a relentless focus on attendance, but using this data tool, which is the first part of the toolkit, to really focus in on the groups and what you can do within the resources from the toolkit to break down the barriers for those groups, I think we can get some success. So I hope you find that part of the toolkit really useful. And obviously the national uptake of it currently is very high, and we'd like to see that even higher. The first part,
Hi everyone, I am Tia and I'm an analyst leading the pupil attendance in schools publication, and I'm going to go through the latest attendance statistics. So can I have the next slide, please? This publication is a fortnightly release that you may have seen. It has two components, the Explore Education Statistics publication page and an interactive attendance dashboard. You can view attendance data daily, weekly, or year to date, and can look at individual terms. This allows you to benchmark against national attendance figures or regions and local authorities of interest. The most recent publication of the 2024-25 academic year covered the week beginning the 21st of October, which was the week before half term for the majority of schools. The overall attendance rate was 7.0% for all schools, which had increased from the previous week where it was 5.9%. There was an increase across all school types, and the increase in absence before a half term is in line with trends that we've seen in previous academic years. Just to note as well, at the end of the autumn term, persistent absence statistics and a breakdown of absence by key pupil characteristics will be published in the publication going forward, and then characteristics will continue to be published on a termly basis. I'm going to pass over to the next speaker now. Thanks.
Thanks, Tia. So I'm just going to take you through a new feature. If we could pop over to the next slide, please. So levers. We know that there has been an issue for some time in how we present levers in the reports that you see. And we've been working behind the scenes for some time to try and resolve how to present your data in a way that better reflects how you view absence and attendance for these pupils. Effectively, what's happened is that we, in some cases, for some schools, we have you're sending us some information which is a bit contradictory. And what I mean by that is that we have pupils who have sessions recorded after their leaving dates. And what we've decided to do, and this change came into effect at the end of last week, is to take the leaving date that you record in your MIS as definitive. So previously, before last week, we included attendance for all pupils who had recorded attendance sessions in your MIS, but that meant that pupils where you'd recorded a leaving date were showing. So what we have now done is we have excluded any sessions recorded after a pupil's leaving date. So that has been updated in your reports that you see for the current year and for the previous academic year. So we hope that means you will see changes and improvements in the results that you see for your school on Monitor Your School attendance. If we go to the next slide, please. So we have added, so that you can check sort of what's going on with these leaving dates and the sessions recorded after leaving dates, we've added a new report onto the tool. So if you look at this slide where we've got the Insights dashboard, there is a new report called Check Leaver Data. And what that shows is a list of pupils who have sessions on your MIS recorded after the leaving date. So it gives you the name of the pupil, their UPN, and their leaving date that is recorded through your MIS, and then the last recorded attendance session. What we're asking you to do is to check that the leaving dates are correct and have been used correctly, and crucially, as I'm sure you will, to make sure that you follow the guidance on how to record pupils and what is allowed and not allowed through the guidance, and that's in chapter 7 of the guidance, which specifically around page 64 of the guidance, and that's really important before you make any changes to leaving dates in your MIS. We hope that this will really help to get to the bottom of what's going on with leaving dates and how they are shown. And I think this is a great example of where, as we're now taking in data directly from your live systems, we're having to deal with these kinds of issues and figure out together how to present information back to you, where this is sort of day-to-day life. Humans, we're all sort of entering data. Practice isn't always, of course, the same in every school. So this, we hope, will improve the data for you. Next slide, please. So this is the end of the webinar. We just wanted to leave you with some key messages. Next slide, please. So the first one is, of course, if you haven't already, to access the attendance toolkit for schools that Rob Tarn was talking about. The second is that if you're a mainstream secondary school, to download and have a look at the summary of your attendance on Monitor Your School Attendance. And the third is to have a look at that check leavers data report that I've just shown you to make sure that leaving dates have been used correctly. Thank you so much for attending. Our next webinar will be in January. Please do sign up for that. We are also going to have a little table at the School and Academy show tomorrow at the NEC in Birmingham. And if you'd like to come and see us there, we'd be really delighted to see you in person and answer any questions that you have and take any feedback. Thank you so much for today. Have a good afternoon, everybody.